Hello and welcome to the Momentum Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Dallin Malm. This podcast features conversations with athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs who use their success and influence to serve a purpose greater than themselves. My guest today is the president of one of the most quietly influential innovation engines in the country. It's called the Space Dynamics Laboratory, or SDL for short. Located in Logan, Utah, this university-affiliated research lab is building a first-of-its-kind space and defense technology. My guest oversees this organization of more than 1,400 people who run nearly 200 active projects. It's work so specialized that they rarely do the same thing twice. His leadership motto is simple and operational. He teaches others that we respect, we collaborate, we empower, and we deliver. Our conversation opens with what we call the space renaissance. We talk about why launches are cheaper, how the rate of innovation has exploded, and how that's reshaping both commercial opportunity and national security. But we'll also get practical, and we talk about how to lead an organization at scale, how to build trust across technical teams, and how to create a culture where ownership is real for everyone. What's cool is not only is my guest a leader of a nationally renowned organization, he's also a highly respected and active leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His position is that of an Area 70, where he has stewardship over the teaching, the ministering, and the temporal needs of tens of thousands of individuals. You'll hear him share memorable mental frameworks, reflections on what his religious services taught him, and some other awesome professional stories like this time that he completely blew a $1.3 million project. But after all that you hear, I hope that you can see how genuine and sincere this man is. In my experience, it's rare to find someone with such passion and success, along with such depth of character. Please enjoy my conversation with Jed Hancock.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
You ask, what is our aim? Victory. Victory, however long and hard the road may be.
This will be remembered forever as the greatest day in the history of the Tour de France. You believe in miracles? Yes!
I think the place to begin, since this is a really cool and exciting area, is this space renaissance that you get a front row seat to. You have a different perspective because right now there is a lot of momentum behind the rocket booster movement funded by billionaires who are excited about space exploration, where this is a lot more focused on engineering, research, scientific purposes. So I think you're seeing a very different side of space and what's a part of this new world. So can you give me your overview of your perspective on this space renaissance?
Yeah. So, the space renaissance I think we're seeing is that there has been technology advancement that has enabled access to space by markets, people, societies that previously, they were deterred because of cost. But let me give you a couple examples. Just imagine where, internet by spaceborne assets, a small antenna can then be put on any kind of a schoolhouse in any rural part of Africa or anywhere around the world. Now you just changed the educational landscape of the planet and the opportunity for advancement and for knowledge to flow more freely. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The other side of that is, national security perspective, space has kind of always been the high ground. And technologies that were once only available to governments can now be purchased, freely by almost anyone. And so it's really leveled the playing field, the access to spaceborne technologies. And then obviously there is a lot of economic opportunity. That's why you're seeing so many companies not just launch one satellite on a rocket, but hundreds of satellites being deployed on one rocket launch. And I think the part exciting for us at Space Dynamics Lab is we saw this coming. This renaissance of space in large part is driven by small satellites. satellites that are small, that are the size of a loaf of bread, are very useful because of the miniaturization of technology and the way it can be used and deployed. They can be science satellites, communication devices, reconnaissance, almost anything.
What developments over the past 5 to 10 years have been the most impactful to the way that the Space Dynamic Labs works?
Well, I mentioned the small satellite piece. So, reaction wheels, computer systems, solar panels, all of these things that were once only available for satellites the size of a car are now available for satellites, that are inches in size, not feet in size. And we help develop a lot of those technologies here and prove them and try them. And so we're just seeing so many more mission applications. And the United States, is both from a defense and a commercial perspective, we use a word called proliferation. And it's the proliferation of low Earth orbit. It's the proliferation of these spaceborne assets that's changing the world.
It's another word for development or being prolific. Is that where it comes from?
Just think high quantities, right? There was a time in our parents' generation that hardly anyone had a computer at their desk in the workforce.
Yeah.
Now everybody has a computer. Everybody has a laptop, a cell phone, an iPad. And so the proliferation of computer devices has changed our economy and the way we communicate. And so the proliferation of the space layer has changed the way nations defend themselves. It's changed the way we forecast weather. It's changed the way we communicate. You can call almost anywhere in the world for your monthly cell phone fee. And all this has happened because of space technologies.
When you said you saw this coming, is that you from the executive leadership of the Space Dynamic Lab? Was it something that you've talked about in conversations, or is it something that you've felt coming, and so you've led the organization a certain way, knowing that much of the work, so to say, is being done for you by other agencies that are innovating and developing?
Yeah, let me give you an example. 39 years ago, some very bright professors and folks at Space Dynamics Lab started the Small Satellite Conference, and it was very small, 20s and 30s and 40s of people. And that was 39 years ago. Last year, there were close to 5,500 people from all the states and many, many countries, 40 countries or something like that, all in the Salt Lake Salt Palace with 5,500 attendees, a worldwide audience.
Wow.
So 39 years ago, we were talking about it, working on it, could see that what it could enable, and it's here. It's happened.
How did you sell key stakeholders on what you thought the vision was going to look like? Because I imagine, at least the story usually goes with things like this, that you really do have to sell it, or you need someone to really believe it and help you push it through. What did that look like 39 years ago?
Well, obviously, it's before my personal time, but the way it was sold was, think about how much more you could do with something smaller and how much more satellites you could launch for the same mass. So a lot of it is just driven by cost. It's just about getting the products and the things to market in a more cost-effective manner. So it was hard to sell because in the early days, the capabilities just weren't what you wanted them to be. But as those capabilities become more and more proven, because technology advancements, semiconductors and sensors and reaction wheels and all the things that we talked about, it sold themselves.
In your time at the Space Dynamic Lab over the last 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Can you walk me through any situations you remember that were, you could call them keystone moments or big pivot points, or the sine qua non, the without which this doesn't all happen? What are some key moments that you were a part of that have brought this organization where it is today? So,
yeah, I'll share my point of view on this, that is really kind of an overall life point of view, not just from this business or being a part of the leadership of this business. But I think it really changed for us when we found out who we are. Space Dynamics Lab, we're wholly owned by Utah State University, but we have a very unique designation as a university-affiliated research center. We're one of 15 in the nation. We're owned by the university, but in our responsibility as a defense technology laboratory, we report to the Pentagon, to the Secretary of War for Research and Engineering. Once we understood what it meant to be a UART, how we should do business, the kinds of relationships we should develop, the technologies we should invest in, all of our decisions became more clear when we understood who we are. And that was when I really believe the knee in the curve began for Space Dynamics Lab in terms of our contribution. We really aren't motivated by profit or by size. We're motivated to contribute to the national need. And once we understood that, all of our decisions became way simpler.
So tell me more about an organization coming to know who they are.
Well, if you're constantly consumed or worried about what you think other people think, or whatever the latest new item is in the news or technology breakthrough, you can really make yourself crazy trying to be the very best. And a large company and even a family, you can really only pick one or two things a year that you can really do to move the needle. And so if you know who you are, then the second step is to knowing what you should do about that.
How do you get people on board with that? Because you're saying no to a lot of things.
Yep.
And you're saying yes to some things as well. But this is a big organization. I mean, how many employees?
We have over 1,400 people.
So the leadership core of that, I'm not sure how many people you consider the leadership core outside of just the executive level, probably a few dozen critical members. How do you get them on board?
Well, I think that's, that would be maybe my point number 2, is everybody is a leader of the organization. Everybody is a brand ambassador. When I think about our organization, there would be thousands and thousands of contacts with our customer base every day by everybody. And so having a very simple message, helping others understand who you are, being a good listener, helping understand and then translating, their needs to the core of the business. I really think that's the job of the executive, is to really listen and then communicate. So once the leadership team experiences the success, then it sells itself. Everybody craves direction, guidance, and to be the part of a winning team. So a few wins in, and everybody's on board.
Can you tell me of a time where you had to, an adjustment is maybe a harsh word, but somebody that you wanted on the team was having a hard time with the direction you were going? How did you help raise their vision, or help them align with the goals, or help them to ultimately not fall in line, but to really bring all of themselves to the mission at large?
Well, why don't I just start with myself? I had the blessing of being a young leader at Space Dynamics Lab, and within any organization, there is a division of duty and a division of responsibility, but it all has a common purpose. And as a young leader, I looked at my colleagues at times and their organizational needs and what they needed to fulfill their part of our mission as sometimes competitive against my purposes, or even a distraction at times of what I felt like was important. And so without knowing it, I was part of the dividing. And when I realized, through the help of really good colleagues, even coaches, some leadership experience, that if I would be inclusive instead of exclusive in everything I was trying to accomplish, include all of my colleagues, all of my leaders, what I realized is that inclusion brought out the very best ideas of everyone and made what I thought I was trying to accomplish even better. So that's really, I'd really start with myself. I think that pivotal turning point for me was a serious step in my leadership progression. I started to view others as an integral part of me. And if I could bring out the very best in the people around me by just being respectful and inclusive and collaborative and kind, I just watched the overall performance of the organization just take several notches up.
But anybody who knows you would agree and say that seems to be a natural part of your character. Kind, thoughtful, a good listener, a good collaborator. But what experience happened that really drove that point home for you?
Well, there would be several, but I'll share one that was impactful. At our organization, we do something at times called a 360 review. So an independent leadership coach would come and ask a series of very simple questions about their interactions with you from the leaders around you. And there's positive feedback and there's constructive feedback. And when I received that constructive feedback at work, I thought to myself, this isn't me. This isn't who I want to be. And I was able to make just that very simple adjustment to ensure that all those traits that I wanted to be everywhere were also consistent in my work life. So that was a real deep and awesome personal moment for me. Having that leadership coaching. I would encourage anyone to have a 360 review in a leadership position.
Simple questions that really bring it down to the essence of what you believe and what you're doing. Was that a good way to describe it?
Yeah. When you see Jed at his best, what does that look like? And if you were a close friend and were to give him 2 items to improve, what would they be? Just very simple questions that can really get to the heart of behaviors. So we have taken very serious here, emotional intelligence and leadership. So everyone is evaluated on their performance. We're a hardcore technical organization, and everyone is also evaluated for their behaviors. And so emphasizing both of those traits, the hardcore technical performance, but also the behaviors.
So you grade them on how they interact with others, like respectful communication. Is that what you mean by behaviors?
Yeah, we all grade each other.
Yeah.
Not just me grading others, but we all, yeah, absolutely. And so we just value leadership characteristics of communication and teamwork, collaboration.
What are some other questions that are good to ask oneself as a part of that 360-degree review?
For me, a whole new world came to life when I tried to really listen. Am I a listener? Do I really listen when people are speaking to me, or am I already thinking about what I'm going to say next? Am I making an assumption or a judgment about what's being said? And I have found if you just listen even a little bit longer than you're used to, that's when the whole new world comes.
They feel more comfortable to share, or what is it in that pause?
It allows you to actually understand and gain understanding and wisdom about the topic that's being discussed and the forthcoming decision that has to be made. And so, yeah, those that are speaking feel like all of a sudden their input matters. And now instead of just getting their backs and their arms, you get their best, their hearts and their minds.
You're fostering that in your organization here. And you do a lot of work with government agencies, the Department of War and NASA and other large bureaucratic organizations that, if I were to guess, some are probably better than others, but generally speaking, there's probably a lot of dysfunction in those organizations. Maybe it's due to misaligned incentives, or maybe it's due to the ultimate goal of some of the people working there, or maybe it's a factor of poor leadership. I don't know. However, you have to work with them, the good and the bad, right? So how does your organization work with an organization that just doesn't function as well, or they don't have the vision or the respect of people, this 360 review, this culture of listening? How do you work with an organization like that?
I think that's a really good question. Some of the complication that you described is just simply the fact that we're a democratic society. And so there's constant change in elected officials and in administrations. But the principles that I'm describing it doesn't mean they ever change from being true. And we always say here that when you have a business experience with SDL, We want you to go away from that review or hang up that phone or go away from that deployment thinking, that was a phenomenal experience to interact with them. They're competent, they're kind, they're trustworthy, they have absolute integrity. And so at every interaction, we do better when we work with Space Dynamics Lab. And they deliver. They deliver on their promises. So I think when you ask that question, how do you work in a constantly evolving and changing environment? You just stay core to the principles. And those, I think, those have seen us through.
That's got to be easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly easier said than done. Although I will say this, even in these agencies that, ultimately are directed by elected officials, they are operating at a mission level. And so one of the things that I always like to share with people when they ask, so what is it that you do? And I will say, do you have a family member in the military? A friend? Our mission is to bring them home safe, to give the United States of America a technology advantage, to bring our soldiers home safe. And that kind of mentality, it just dispels disagreements. Does that make sense? That's our common mission. I think that would hit home for you.
Yeah. My brother's in the military and he's on deployment right now. So thanks for what you're doing for them.
And those are where our technologies are. So we're Space Dynamics Lab, but we do a lot of work in land, sea, air, and cyber.
What's the most common thing, the most simple thing that's asked of you that's actually a lot harder than it sounds?
Boy, just about anything I think that we do. We kind of tease once in a while that there's a box that just says, a miracle occurs here.
Give me an example of that.
I think if I was to describe it like this, you win a new project because we don't ever do anything twice, really. Everything we do is the first of anything. The machine shop that we have on site built 20,000 unique parts last year.
Wow.
We don't build product over and over again. We do the first of anything. And so, just think about that in your own life. Every time you've done something for the first time, got married, started a new job, these kind of changes, they take energy and time. And so when you start up a new project, you have to assign staff, project management, engineering, technical writers, contracts, and you're forming a whole new team to go execute on a set of requirements over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And then you have to estimate what you're going to do that's never been done before and deliver it on the schedule that you said. So every project we do feels this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everything we do.
Well, it's hard to fathom, but
yeah, the vast majority of things we do have not been done before. And so we're asked to know our craft well enough to say that in 24 months, we'll deliver this satellite that will meet these technical requirements within X% of this cost.
Amazing.
And that's what we do. And we do that over and over again. And that's how we gain the trust of people wanting to come back and do business with us. Now, are we perfect? No. But we try to do all we can to do that work with the utmost integrity.
Are you familiar with the early days of SpaceX? Have you read anything about that?
Yeah, we are familiar. We a lot of the things that go into space are going in SpaceX vehicles now. Yeah.
There's a book, you're probably familiar with it. It's called Liftoff by Eric Berger. Have you read that book?
No.
It's one of my favorites. And they tackle a similar problem where they want to do something there's been rockets built before, but not at the speed or the cost or just the crazy way that they went about it. And they were on strict deadlines, mostly because their money had a sunset date, and it was being burned way too fast. And the scrappy nature at which they were able to build, they had 3 shots at it, and their first 2 were kind of disastrous. The third one was looking really good, and it blew up at the finish line, and they were able to cobble together enough money for one more launch, and the 4th one was their successful Falcon rocket, and it's kind of been history since then. But I love that idea of an organization of doing something that nobody's ever done before. And how do you help your people to get in that mindset? And first off, I think it comes from the attitude from the top. Everybody plays a role, but the company is a reflection of the character of its founder. The founder is like the the guardian of the soul of the organization. And in your instance, obviously this is owned by Utah State, but you're the president of the organization. And so I'd say that's probably your job is the guardian of the soul of the Space Dynamics Lab. And with an example like that at the helm, the principles can be taught and the minds and the desires can be fashioned to do something like that, where it's new, it's different every single time.
Well, I love that you mentioned the founders. So Doran and Kay Baker, who were professors at Utah State University, in essence, Doran founded Space Dynamics Lab. He came in 1959 after he was working for the Air Force as an officer, got a PhD in electrical engineering and physics at the University of Utah, came to Utah State when his military service was over. Doran was my major professor when I was in college for my graduate
He
degree.
recruited you here, basically.
So those, I guess what I'm saying, that those characteristics and the way we work and how we do things, it's imbued in me because I worked with the person who was the founder of SDL. And all of the colleagues and wonderful leaders and engineers and people that were from that era have had a profound influence on me and still have a profound influence on Space Dynamics Lab. Absolutely.
And I've heard you tell this story before where it was Professor Baker that got you here. You were going to work at Micron, right?
Yeah.
You had a successful internship at Micron in Boise, was it?
Yep.
You were probably going to accept it from what I remember. And then how did did he leave like a note on your door or something?
Yeah.
And told you to interview here. Tell me that story.
Yeah, I'd worked 2 summers at Micron, and I was in the cell phone camera division, which was brand new in 2001 and 2002. No one had done something like that. But Doran, they were looking for an engineer here, and Doran printed it out and put it on my paper, or printed that paper on my door in my office up at school. And so I applied and gratefully was hired.
You have been in this job since 2021?
Yep.
And at least in this position as president, but you've been here for 20 years. In the same amount of time that you've been here, you've been heavily involved. You teach a class at Utah State, and you're heavily involved in community and religious service. You were a stake president for 9 years. And I remember the stake president, they're the one that's over a large group of congregations of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the stake president's job is insanely busy, but you have all these bishops that you're working with, thousands of members of the church that are under your stewardship. And you're expected to do that while not being paid for that service. And you're raising your family and you're working this job in probably a lot of high stress situations and a lot of important deadlines, government money. And I'm curious, how did you manage those stressful moments earlier in your career compared to how you manage them now? Because your responsibilities have not lightened in the least degree. There's just more and more.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, how do we grow with those opportunities? And I mean, the first thing I would say is we have a Savior, Jesus Christ, and He empowers and enables and helps and lifts us. And when we are about helping others and loving others, then we have full access to His power and to Him to help us. And I've felt that throughout my whole life. I've never viewed opportunities to serve the Lord or serve others as a distraction or a deterrent from my career. It's been quite opposite. I was not the president of Space Dynamics Lab when I was called to be the stake president. I was serving as a division director, and then I became an executive director of programs and operations, and then I became the president of the organization. So 3 job changes since the time I was called as a stake president.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you say, how do you do that? First, you have faith in the Lord that He'll help you. But Natalie, my wife, and my children, we're just a team. Everything we do together is a team. And I don't think my children have ever felt, even for a second, neglected because of church service opportunities or my career. We just try to integrate and do everything that we can together. So a lot of the key leadership principles that I believe have learned in my life and tried to implement have come equally from opportunities to serve and lead in the Lord's church. So the goodness feeds off each other.
Yeah. Has that always been your mindset and your attitude?
It really has. It really has.
Where did you learn that?
You know, I would have to say my good mom and dad, my parents, have a grandfather, my mother's grandfather, that was a huge influence in my life, always serving, World War II veteran, but principally my mom and my dad. That's what they did for us. We always felt number one to our parents, and they were always serving and working and striving, and they took us along with them. And I've tried to do that with my kids a lot too, and so has Natalie.
So then how do you counsel other people when they are feeling rocked by the stress and the expectations and the responsibility? You have a really level head when it comes to this stuff, and it's cool that you've always been that way. I've known you for a while, and that's all that I know of you, it's a remarkable gift. But not all of us are like that. I can speak for myself. I'm definitely more emotional, and I can be a little more volatile. So when people come to you and they ask you, like, Jed, like, how can I be like that? Or I'm really struggling with this, or I feel like in my heart I want to do good in all these things, but I'm having a hard time keeping it together. What counsel do you give them?
Well, look, two things come to mind. First is, we're just all not going to do everything perfect. So you just have to give yourself a little bit of grace and realize that your best effort is enough. It's okay. There's some days when, you're doing A+ work. Other days, B+ work is about all you can pull off, and that's just okay. So I think we all have to give ourselves a little bit of grace there. And sometimes it is just true. We can't do everything all at once. So that's my point number 2. I really like the analogy that life is like juggling. And the juggler has to keep all the balls in the air, or tries to keep all the balls in the air. But the reality is some of the balls that are being juggled are made of glass, and others are made of rubber. And so part of the show is for the juggler to let the balls made of rubber bounce for a little bit, even until they get to like an inch off the ground, and then kick it with your toe back into the rotation. Now, the tricky part about life is that in midair, sometimes those balls can turn from rubber to glass. And that's the job of the juggler, is to keep track of what's happening in your life. Sometimes my work is the ball made of glass, and it just requires all of my attention in that moment and for that time. And I've had a lot of those times. Sometimes my family is the ball that's made of glass. And my church calling and my work, I'll use my annual leave, that they have to wait so that I can be attentive to the needs of my family in that moment. And what I found is that if we can do that for each other, let each other be attentive to the really important needs, then things work out, and your stress can be appropriately managed and maintained. I've really felt that.
I'd never thought about that before, changing from rubber to glass, but I can think of a lot of things in my life that analogy is really applicable to.
Yeah, I mean, just even physical health,
Sure.
My sweet mother passed away almost 2 years ago, and it was one of the hardest times of my life. I had really heavy assignments at work. I was in new Area 70 going to state conferences up and down the Wasatch Front, and my mom had an unexpected aneurysm that really hurt her. And for the next 2 months, her health really degraded day by day until she passed away on March 24th. That was a really challenging time. And my family, my sweet mom, that was the ball made of glass. And so while I was able to do everything else, everyone around me gave me the grace and understanding that I needed to be with my sweet mom and my father and my family more during that time. I'm just like everybody else. There's tears, and it's not easy all the time.
Yeah. You've been in positions, not only professionally, but obviously in your religious service, where you have been the point of counsel for a lot of people of all ages. You've been in unique positions where people are their most vulnerable in front of you, also the most open and interested in talking to you. As a leader, leadership is influence. John Maxwell teaches that. And when you have that influence and that you're put in that position to help other people in their lives, is there a point of counsel, or is there a lesson or a principle that that repeatedly comes back to you that you like to share with other people? It's more or less something that you feel particularly drawn to or inspired by.
Gosh, that'd be so hard to pick one. But specific on the point of helping others, right? Providing counsel or when someone is in high need. Oftentimes we kind of know the direct path or the right path or the right guidance or what we're actually looking for. But because we're hurting, it's hard for us to articulate and to feel steady about what it is we should do. So I think in those really important times as a friend or as a leader, a church leader, as you've described, having that key capability to truly listen with love and then reflect back to the individual what they're actually saying, and then just ask inspired questions. Ask them questions that lead them to God, to the Lord, and to themselves and to their family. And then they almost surprise themselves by knowing how to work through their own challenges. I remember a time ago, I used to carry 3x5 cards in my pocket. And in one setting, an individual that was really hurting and needing some direction, I said, listen, I really feel like what we talk about today is going to be inspired by our Heavenly Father and by Jesus Christ. And so I just want to write down some of the main points that, are discussed. And so I began just asking some simple questions. How are you feeling? What do you think would be the appropriate next step? How would you want to work through that? And I just wrote down 3 or 4 bullets that they had said. And then I just turned the card at the end of the, 20, 30-minute conversation and said, how do you feel about these things that, we've written down? And they made a commitment to go do it. Because it came from them.
Yeah.
Came, I believe, from the Lord, obviously, but it came to their heart and mind, not just mine. And so it wasn't just one person giving counsel. It was 2 people talking to each other with love for each other and love for the Lord. And it made the solutions just more readily apparent.
Why do you think people so often run from what they know is true or what they know in their heart they should be doing?
So sometimes because of the pain or the emotional health of the individual, it's really hard for the heart and the head to be connected. And so there's just enough confusion and commotion that they need counsel. They need a church leader or a professional to help them just talk through and sort through and find 1 or 2 grounding principles that can turn into action. So I think just the acute pain and emotional health can be a deterrent. Other times, it is really true. We run with the pack we joined.
Yeah.
And there are just, I told you, I've been very blessed to have amazing parents and colleagues and friends that have influenced my everyday. I think that's why I'm so inspired and committed to try to be a positive influence on others, because I've had so many in my own life.
Tell me about an experience where you have reached out to foster one of those relationships, somebody you've identified that I want to have a line closer to them. How did you go about that? And what did that turn out to be?
Serving in a leadership role in the church makes it very easy to reach out to others. I remember one time my friend Todd Brown and I, we were serving in the presidency together, and we left a presidency meeting and thought we need to go visit someone in their home. And so as we knocked on the door, the husband came to the door and got huge tears in his eyes and began to cry and said, "How did you know?" And we said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, my wife's been diagnosed with cancer, and I was just preparing to give her a blessing, and you just showed up." And that was just, leaving the meeting with one of my counselors, he and I feeling inspired to stop at someone's home. It was that simple. Other times, I recall sitting on the stand and watching someone walk in and just noticing their countenance was maybe a little bit lower, and just walking back at the end of the meeting and saying, "How are you doing? How are you feeling today?" And then that just led to an opportunity to talk, and ultimately that young person who had felt maybe a little forgotten, a little bit lost, 9 months later was serving in the mission field.
Mm.
And so I just think that everyday walks and talks of our life, if we're looking to the right or to the left, we'll see people just by asking a couple of inspired questions. And, can we go to lunch? Can we visit? It's really fun.
You referenced earlier the ability to be empowered through Jesus Christ. And that's an interesting word. I know that was an intentional use of that word by you. Something that empowers you, gives you the ability to accomplish something that you left to your natural abilities would not be able to do, or not be able to do well or as well. How do you teach someone to understand what that really means? Because Jesus Christ, as we know him, is not physically lifting you, so to say, or he's not linked arm in arm with you physically, right next to you, literally. But in a very real sense, we talk about that empowerment and that enabling ability of Jesus Christ as if he were. How do you explain that to somebody who doesn't quite understand that, or who would like to understand that better?
I will give it in a simple example. Find someone in need, someone who truly can't do something for themselves. Maybe it's carrying the groceries for someone that's incapacitated in a wheelchair. Spend time, doing something for someone that go serve soup at a soup kitchen at a homeless shelter. Spend significant time, not just 10 minutes. Serve others. And when you complete that experience, just check your inner self of how you feel. When you provide service or love for someone who can't do something for themselves, you have a greater sense of self-confidence and a greater sense of even who you are, and you feel joy. And that inner feeling that you're feeling, that comes from God, because you're doing what he would do if he were here. You're more empowered to go about your own daily life, your own work, your own family, because of the love and care that you're giving for others. That's as simple as I can say it. Just try that experiment. Conduct an experiment.
It reminds me of that principle taught by President Spencer W. Kimball, where he said, when you do an act of service for another person, there is substance added to your soul. Your soul, in a sense, becomes more substantive. And when you continue to do things, you forget yourself and you lose yourself in the service of others. When you look back at yourself, we say that it's easier to, quote, find yourself. And he said the reason why we say that is because there's more substance to your soul. Therefore, there's more of you to find. And so it's easier.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I love that statement. That substance is the grace of God. It's his power.
Can I ask you this?
Yeah.
I have a good friend. His name's Jamie Holyoke. He's the president at Fox Pest. You know Jamie. An amazing guy. Jamie's had an amazing career. And he took a group of young men. They went to Salt Lake, and they had a special opportunity to spend a couple hours with David A. Bednar, Elder Bednar, and his wife. Or maybe his wife maybe it was just him at the office. And one of the things that he said was, okay, I'm so glad that you're all here, the young men and the leaders. I want the leaders to just be quiet for the next hour. And I just want to talk to the young men. And one of the young men asked him a question saying, Elder Bednar, how does a young man get strengthened to stay away from something like pornography? What are the things that you would tell him to do? And Elder Bednar leaned forward and he said to him, if you knew who you really are, you would never be tempted by something like that. And I'm sure there's more to that story as the principle he taught, but that's what has stuck to me over these last few years. As you hear that story, can you help shed some light to that?
Well, that's what I was talking about. I think a strategy for an individual, a company, a family, it all starts with knowing who you are. And I love Elder Bednar, and I think, when I hear him lean forward and make a statement like that, we all think that our DNA comes from our parents, that we have, I have red hair, right? None of my parents have red hair, but we all think that our characteristics come from our biological, our mortal mother and father. But that physical DNA is so small compared to your spiritual DNA. You are literally the son or daughter of God. You are literally his spirit child. Your makeup, the makeup of your soul, is all from your heavenly parents. And so when he says who you really are, I believe that's what he's talking about. You're so much more than your physical makeup or your biological DNA that you can see with your mortal eyes. Your soul is primarily as a child of God. And so, as we know, pornographic content or something that in essence belittles or demeans or sets almost at naught the human body and the purpose it was created, is because we know who we are and we know what our bodies are for and why they're so important in this part of our eternal progression. I have a couple of experiences I wanted to share, maybe off topic from even some of the questions.
Go ahead.
So one of the leadership lessons that I learned in my career as a program manager was a really tough one to learn. We had just won a contract to deliver the detectors, the electronics, that would be the eyes of a mission called OSIRIS-REx that would navigate and then document this large asteroid in space that this spacecraft would pick a sample of and then bring it back to Earth. It was a 7-year space mission. All this has happened, an amazing success. But in the early development, our customers, our partners at the University of Arizona, the Lunar Planetary Lab, when we took over this job, they gave us the beginnings of a design, and we just kind of went with it because, it was their design. They gave it to us. We furthered it. And when we got the initial detectors from the foundry and we put it on the first test system, we broke it.
Oh.
And this is a $1.3 million procurement, and we broke the first detector. And so the project manager is named Chuck. He got on a plane and he flew up to Logan, Utah, and he pulled me aside into an office and he said, "Jed, I came here to see you and let you know how disappointed I am in you. And we hired you to deliver these detector assemblies. And so I really didn't want to hear or see the same design we delivered you. I expected you to own it and to improve it and to make it what it needed to be for the mission to be successful." And I learned a huge lesson in accountability and ownership. That when I was entrusted with something, I was going to work with my team to see it all the way through to the very best that it could be, and not just accept a starting point and then blame any kind of a failure because of where we started. Obviously, my team was absolutely amazing that I was working with, brilliant, and they came up with very novel and awesome solutions, and everything worked successfully on the mission. But it was a huge turning point in my personal development as a leader in my career, to accept extreme ownership and accountability for what I was entrusted with.
It was given to you in a certain way, but it was not expected to be returned that way.
It was expected to be improved to survive space launch and 7 years in outer space and do the mission the way it was supposed to.
Wow. A lesson learned the hard way, but a lesson learned.
A lesson learned the hard way, but a lesson learned. One of my, searing experiences.
You said there was a second story.
Yeah, there's a second story. That is my absolute belief and outlook in this generation. And I'll share this story of someone who works here now that's a dear friend, but a really bright optical scientist. I went and did interviews at the University of Arizona. We were looking for PhD students. And I found a young man who grew up in Phoenix. And, his circumstances from, perspective of the world were probably pretty primitive. He lived in an apartment with his mom, didn't have his own bedroom. But he committed himself as a young student in high school that his education and his seriousness and hard work in school were going to help him achieve his dreams, to do optics in space and to have a career and really further his life. So he took it very serious. And when he was telling me this story, it was in an interview at the University of Arizona, and I was there looking for PhD students, and he was a sophomore in his undergraduate. But I was so impressed with his character that I hired him.
Wow.
And the HR team said, Jed, we came here to find graduate students. I said, I know. I found a future one. And so hired this young man. And over the course of the next several years, he continued his education. He came up here to Logan in the summers. And everything that I saw in his character came true in every class he ever took and every project he undertook. And so proud of him. Just this, a month ago, I was on his committee where he defended his doctoral dissertation and completed the requirements for his PhD. And he's a performance system engineer on one of our largest and most important programs at SDL. And that experience with him was, it was probably 8 years ago now.
Wow.
And it just tells me the capability of this generation, their brightness and their goodness, but these core traits of integrity and hard work and just believing in education. That's part of what I love about Space Dynamics Lab. Offers those opportunities.
The answers are relatively unchanged over the years.
Unchanged.
The principles are the same.
Yeah.
The methods might be different, the personality types, but the principles are grounded in an absolute truth.
Yeah.
And it's really special to have the ability to see the depth of character like that. Somebody who would prove to go unchanged in a change of their circumstances because they were rooted in the right things. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
You started the conversation, Dallin, about the space renaissance. I don't expect this renaissance to change anytime soon. And I don't expect the geopolitical circumstances of the world to change. And I think for us, American citizens, it's time to really double down on the principles of freedom that have made this country what it is constitutionally. There are, adversary nations to the United States of America, our way of thinking and our way of life. And so I'm just super proud of the contributions of Space Dynamics Lab in that regard, who we are and what we're doing for our nation. And that alone, I think, grounds the employees of SDL, the men and women who work here, who we owe all of our success to, grounds them in our sense of purpose and sense of mission. And so that goes right next as a companion to that principle of who we are. That's what we do.
What would success look like for SDL in 10 years from now?
The continued contributions that advance our nation forward in the core technologies we provide, satellite systems, sensors, large-scale data systems. So success for us is that we continue to change the world in giving the United States a technical advantage. I mean, if someone was to ask me what's a couple of ways that your organization has changed the world, one would be that, the research and the technology we provided proved that you could track missiles from space.
Mm.
And now almost all nations, certainly the United States, the tracking of missiles from space is a core component of the Department of Defense, the Department of War. Another way is in the late 90s, we took a new technology, which was data compression, and we deployed that on several airframes for the Navy, where before they would fly fighter jets that had wet film cameras in them. Now they could fly digital cameras with real-time data links that could get information in the hands of people who needed it really quickly. And so the whole digital transformation of imagery and information, we were at the very pointy end of that and spearheaded those developments with the Navy that is now obviously on all branches of the services. So that's two ways that we've changed the world with technology insertion and development.
At any organization, though, especially in organizations of 1,400 people, one of the roles of the head of the organization is to be able to, for lack of better words, hear the music when the music is slowing, when it's speeding up, when it goes quiet. And you prepare your organization for what you see on the horizon, almost as a watchman on the tower would, right? My question is, sometimes we need to relearn the same lessons, but oftentimes it's just the lessons compound, and there's new things that need to be learned at different seasons of the life of the company and the organization. What's the critical lesson that SDL has to learn right now if they are to succeed and accomplish their mission 5 and 10 years down the road?
Oftentimes, in my experience, an organization's success can get in the way of their continued progress. Even though we're growing, even though our contributions are growing, the number of people, the number of research dollars, SDL has to stay steadfast and committed to these principles of success. We have a poster in every conference room in this company with our 4 values: respect, collaborate, empower, and deliver. And if we'll stay true to those 4 values and remembering who we are, that success will be continued. What we're currently working with and grappling with is a lot of companies doing this right now, and organizations, is the deployment of artificial intelligence into the products that we're delivering, the research that we're delivering, all the way out on the edge. This season of autonomy and artificial intelligence is really only beginning. Our role is to do things the first time, is to lead out in those fields. And so we're striving and we're working very hard at this. That'll be a movement for everything we do over the next 5 years easily.
Would it be suicide to the business to not embrace it?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Not just business practices, but as I mentioned, being an integral part of the solutions that we're delivering. There'll just be a time when the computing systems that we have in our pockets and that are a part of the things that we build and do are so advanced that they can handle so much artificial intelligence, so much decision-making capability and power, that it's hard for us to even see, the new technologies and solutions that will be coming about. So being hungry to learn and open-minded.
And it's got to be done in a way that's never been done before.
Never been done.
But still delivered on the timeline.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom leading an organization that would do that.
Yeah.
But it's being done.
Yeah. Innovation is in the air we breathe. It's not a buzzword here. It's really who we are. It's what we do, which has made it an amazing career for me. I've been at SDL for 22 years, and I feel like I've never had the same job. I've had many careers in one. We have 190 active projects in the organization right now that are funded by our customers and partners.
Wow.
Across the government enterprise.
Well, what you've built here it's highly reputable in Cache Valley itself, but I know that you have domestic and even international organizations that recognize that reputation as well. We stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. However, the direction and the candor, the cadence of today it can only be sustained by those who are leading the helm. And you've done a great job at that. It is still amazing to think about in the context of all of your other responsibilities in life and how you juggle them, as you say.
Well, it's kind of you, but we have an amazing team and amazing people. I share a lot with folks, at an organization like ours. What we have is our staff, our people. That's our product. And we do all we can to ensure that developing our staff for the improvement of their own lives, their own career development, their families, where they want to go, when that aligns with our organization, boy, the sky's the limit. We really try to keep a really tight focus on ensuring that our people and their development and their needs and their growth comes first. And it's amazing the kind of people we're able to bring here. We have 1,400. We've probably brought, 500 or 600 of them here in the last 5 years. And there would be many who would say, oh, you can't do that. You can't bring that number of people to a place like Logan, Utah. But we have, and we continue to.
It can be done.
Yep. Everybody wants to be on a winning team.
Yeah. And they want to feel valued and known and inspired. I want to give you one final question that I ask all of my guests, and it's this. What's the kindest thing that anyone's done for you?
My immediate thoughts just come to my wife, Natalie. Just the everyday kindness and love that she gives me. She makes our life together a very safe and warm and loving place. So it's hard for me to find a single act of kindness, but her kindness in my life is interwoven over the last 25 plus years. it's hard for me to even think of someone else in my mind other than Natalie. Just the way she treats me and cares for me and thinks of me first, constantly. That's a somber question for me to think about, and it really helps me to reflect on her.
Natalie is a beautiful person.
Yeah, she is. She is more than beautiful.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast on Instagram at the handle Momentum Theory Pod, where I'll be announcing new episodes weekly, as well as sharing my top takeaways from every conversation. As always, I invite you to please share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from the conversation. So long for now, and thank you for tuning in.